So I asked Mike Best earlier if it was okay if we made a little bit of a mess on the stage, and he said, it's okay, we got people for that. So I didn't say it. Matt, will you do me a favor and go turn the stage light on? Appreciate it. Well, big thank you to Evan and Hadley. I appreciate it. I'll tell you, it has been a blessing to just have students that are just eager and willing to serve and get up here and teach. We've been talking about recently in the youth, making disciples who make disciples. That's kind of my vision for the youth and why I do everything that I do. I'm not just here to teach and, they go home and then they call it a day. I'm here to make sure our students are equipped outside of the church to be able to talk about Jesus. And so having them be bold enough, and I knew they'd kill it. I knew they'd have fun with it. It's just been awesome working on that with them, and I think they loved it, and I love getting to work on it with them. So thank you again to Evan and Hadley. I don't know where they went, but big round of applause for them again. Great sports. Thank you, Aiden. So what I'm going to be talking about today is up on the screen. It says transformed. And so I'm going to be talking about transformation like they said with that verse. The old is gone, the new is here. And kind of to give you an idea of where I'm going with this and my idea of transformation is, I think that Jesus Christ didn't come down, God in the form of a man to die on a cross for our sins. He didn't do all that just so we could just hop into a baptismal, stand up, our hair's still wet, we take a pic, post a picture on the gram, put it in the Instagram bio, and then there's no real change. Nothing else really changes. And so I'm talking about today this idea of a whole transformed life, the old being gone and the new creation being born. And so to give you a couple more references of what I'm talking about today, I think about a lot the new iPhone, right? Every year they come out with a brand spanking new iPhone, and people line up like for miles to just get this new iPhone, right? And people are so excited, and then you get it, and then I don't know about y'all, but I look at the new iPhone every year, and I'm like, is this just the same iPhone? They just put like a new camera on it. Or they added like, man, now the screen is 2% bigger, and they just release it, and it's a whole new iPhone. And you're like, is this really a brand new thing, or is it just kind of the same old thing? They just changed it a little bit. And so in the same kind of line of thinking, every year around January, I'm sure you probably see people do this, and if you can't think of anybody off the top of your head, maybe it's because this is you. Every year around January, I see at least one or two people post something online, and they've cut their hair, or they dyed their hair a little bit, and they say, new year, new me. And it's like, it's not a new you. It's like, it's just you with a different haircut. You're still just as mean, or just as needy, or whatever it is. You're the same person, you just got a new haircut, and now you're feeling yourself a little bit, right? But it's the same you. There's not really that much of a change. The old isn't gone. The new creation hasn't come. It's still the same concept. It's still the same thing. And so this week, as I dedicated myself to this sermon, I was writing down all my generic ideas that I could have, used everything that I could in my flesh and in my brain, and then I said, all right, God, what do you want me to say? And the first thing God kind of brought to my attention was another way I could get us to understand transformation. I know we have a lot of guests here today, but for a lot of us, if you remember that building across the parking lot with two big garage doors over there, over the last 5 or 6 years, that building has been transformed, right? For those who remember what it looked like before, I remember walking in there, and, there was no drywall. I could almost see the sun through the walls. You could see, like, the sun through the ceiling a little bit. There was no heat, no AC. The lawn equipment was in there. It was all wooden and dirty. It made me kind of scared to walk in almost. It wasn't a great place to have youth. But over the last few years, that building has been transformed, right? It's been given a new purpose. And now it's no longer the storage shed or the garage. Now it's the youth room. Now it's got a whole new name. It's got a whole new purpose. The old is gone. The new has come. And when I'm talking about the youth room, I love how it continues to transform. We continue to kind of update it. We continue to add new things. We got TVs. We got heat and AC. Thank you, Lord, for heat and AC. But we got a couch in there. I got my Arby's booth in there still, and I'm loving it. But my favorite new addition that we just got here recently is we got ourselves a whiteboard wall. And when I say a whiteboard wall, what I'm not saying is, to be clear, for those of you who haven't been out there, I'm not just saying a big whiteboard. I'm talking about a whiteboard wall. And so for about 2 years now, I've wanted a chalkboard wall. I've really just wanted something where I can write down stuff on the wall, and I can decorate it depending on what my lesson is, and I can just erase it. And so I can just keep, just going crazy on a wall where I'm teaching our kids just using this whole wall. Because I'm up here moving around. I do the same thing in youth. And so I want a whole wall that I can write on. But for about 2 years, it's kind of on the back burner, and it's no big deal to me. I'm very patient. I believe that everything is made perfect in God's timing. And so God comes through. About maybe 5 months ago now, I don't know, Emily walks into youth, and she starts helping us out. Emily's been great. And I tell her about my vision for the chalkboard wall. And the first words out of her mouth are, well, why don't we do a whiteboard wall? And I was like, that's it. We're going to Pastor Mike. We're ordering it. I'll paint it myself if I have to. And now we got ourselves a whiteboard wall. And man, it has been such a blessing. I am going crazy in there. I'm writing one thing over here and then another thing over here. It takes me like 5 minutes after youth every Wednesday to erase the whole wall because it's just so much stuff. But 2 weeks in a row, I had 2 different students walk up to me, and they showed me a picture of this guy. I don't know, I don't have it on the screen today, but I don't know if you've ever seen this picture of like the guy who's kind of crazy. He's got the cork board, and he's drawing all the red string between all these papers, and he's looking at the camera like this. You know what I'm talking about? And 2 weeks in a row, I had 2 different students show me that picture, and they're like, you look like this when you're teaching. And I was like, I'm okay with that. I was like, I am okay with that. I'm losing my voice up here. And I was like, I'm okay with that. When it comes to the Bible, I am that guy. I'm crazy about it. I love it. I love teaching it. I love connecting all the dots, and I love teaching our students about it. But I think that one reason it's so natural for me is because that's just my God-given gift. I believe there's strength in knowing your strengths and weaknesses, right? And so the first way I want to talk about the way Jesus transforms our lives is the way he transforms the way we serve. And so in my life, from the moment that I was saved, I hopped right in the elementary school ministry. I hopped right into teaching. I was doing everything I could. In Matthew chapter 20, verse 28, it says this. It says, just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. So Jesus is a good example of everything Jesus does in his life is out of love, and he serves people. And so in thinking about ways that we can serve this morning, I think about, okay, well, how do I know where I need to serve? How do I know what my gifts are? And so about a year ago, I think, I don't know exactly how long ago it was, but Paige texted me about spiritual gifts. She said that Pastor had mentioned a spiritual gifts test online, or some sort of spiritual gifts test. And she said, do you know anything about it? I texted Pastor. He couldn't find it. And I was like, well, I don't want to just leave Paige hanging. So I went online myself, and I took like 6 or 7 different spiritual gift tests. And spiritual gift tests, if you've never taken one online, it's kind of like when you go online and you take like BuzzFeed or Facebook quizzes, right? And it's like, which Disney character are you? Or like, what fruit are you? I love those things. And so I'm taking these quizzes, and it's kind of the same concept where they're asking you personal questions, but some of these are like 100+ questions. I take 6 or 7 of them, and there's none that I'm really passionate about, but I send 1 or 2 to Paige, and I said, you know, these can be a good starting point, but, I mean, if you really want to know what your spiritual gifts are, obviously be praying about it, but I said, here's 2 different strategies. Strategy 1 is you go to somebody that you love and you trust well enough that can kind of tell you, hey, what do you think I'm good at? Where do you think I could serve? Like, you know, we've been hanging out, you see me, you see my life. What gifts do you feel like I have? Where could I serve? But I always say, if you do that, you got to really make sure you're asking the right person, and it's got to be somebody you love enough that's going to be real honest with you. Because I always think about, I don't know how many of y'all watch these shows like American Idol or like The Voice or something, and people go on these shows, and sometimes people get up there and they start singing, and it's bad. It's bad. And when I see that, I always feel bad because I'm thinking, did nobody in their life, you know, when they said, hey guys, I'm going on American Idol, did nobody go, maybe God's calling you to serve somewhere else, you know, like, was nobody honest enough to say that? And so if you're going to ask people, just make sure you ask somebody who you know is going to be loving and honest and willing to tell you maybe something you don't want to hear. But if you're figuring it out for yourself, I said there's 3 things to think about. Thing 1 is, what do you feel like you're passionate about? What do you love to do? Thing 2 is, well, are you good at it? Be honest with yourself, how good are you at it? If you love it and you're good at it, there's this 3rd thing that I thought of. If you love it and you're good at it, and when you tell people about it, they say something like this. They say, oh, that's what you're doing? I could never do that. That takes way too much. That sounds crazy. How do you even do that for so long? How could you make a living out? There's no way I would do that. That's how you know that's your thing. God gave you that passion or that skill intentionally. I'll tell you, like in my life, when I tell people what I do, a lot of times I hear something like this. Oh, you work with middle schoolers and high schoolers? Whew, they got too much going on. I could never do that. They got too much. That's a weird period of life. They got too much energy. They think they know everything. I could never work with them. Or sometimes they'll say, you get on stage and talk in front of people? Oh, I could never do that. I get too nervous. How do you even know what you're going to say? I could never figure something out like that. I hear people say that, and I'm like, well, I know I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. I'm thriving. This is my favorite thing to do. I could do Wednesday nights on Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday nights too. People always say, you know, you don't work a day in your life if you're doing what you love. And I love this. I love what I'm doing, and so I'm doing this, and I love it, and I'll give you a few other examples. Sometimes people say, I just love running. I get up every morning, I run 5 miles. I run 5 miles before I go to bed. I can do it really fast. And I'm like, for the average person, you're not running further from your bed to the bathroom, and that's the max, right? That's the max. And so for people who say they love running, it's like God gave you that for a reason. God gave you that passion, that skill for a reason. I'm going to read from 1 Peter 4:10. He says this. Each of you should use whatever gift you have received to serve others, as faithful stewards of God's grace in its various forms. And I love how he doesn't just say here, you should serve. He says, as faithful stewards of God's grace in its various forms. And God didn't have to give you this passion. He didn't have to make you good at that. But he wired you a specific way out of everybody else who has all their different gifts and their different interests. He gave you this specific interest for a reason. And it'd be a shame if God gave you this out of love and out of grace, and you took that gift and you're like, oh, cool. And you just threw it in the back seat and it collects dust and you never use it. He's saying, as a faithful steward of God's grace, this grace of gifts that he's given you, you should be intentional with how you use it, intentional with how you serve. And so thinking about, again, how everybody's different, we all have these different gifts, oftentimes we talk about unity. God says, hey, we all have different gifts, but I gave you those different gifts for a reason. We're all called to be one body, and we're also all called to love. The church is supposed to be welcoming. And so the next way I'm going to talk about transformation is the way you love. And one reason why I'm doing this too and making this transition is because I think it's a lot easier to serve people once you start loving people. If you don't love people, if you're somebody that gets mad easy, or you're somebody that hates working with people, it's probably pretty hard to serve. And so God transforms the way we love, and I think he also transforms, the idea of love, the way the world looks at it. I think we live in a very angry world today, but in Matthew 22, Jesus says, what's the most important commandment? He says to love God, and he said the second most is to love people. And so in our lives today, I think we just live in an angry world. I think the world's always been angry, but nowadays with social media, it's just twice as easy to see how people are so angry. But I think when I think about how in our world today, people say, well, you got to one-up somebody. If somebody says something to you, you better say something back. You got to get yours. You know what? That person disagrees with you, block them. Stuff like that. I think our world's mentality can be summed up in one phrase, the phrase of a generation. And I think that phrase is the world has a very catch me outside, how about that mentality. We have this idea that we got to get yours, don't let nobody say nothing to you, right? But I think about Jesus and how Jesus lived his life and how Jesus loved, and I don't think Jesus had that same catch me outside, how about that mentality. I think, and don't get me wrong here, I'm a very big proponent for how Jesus was never afraid to say what was on his mind and what he thought was right. If somebody was doing something wrong, Jesus let them know. Like the Pharisees, he would just tell them, hey, here's how y'all are getting it twisted. But what Jesus didn't do, I'll say this. Here's what it would have been like if Jesus had the world's mentality today. The Pharisees pull up, and I picture Jesus with his apostles. I'm going to move over here, these are my apostles today. If Jesus gets pulled up on, the Pharisees are saying, who are you? What are you teaching for? And stuff like that. If Jesus had today's mentality, he'd have said something like, oh, for real? Oh, what's good? Y'all going to say that? Oh, well, guess what? Pharisee number 2 in the back, I know all the wrong things you've been doing. I'm going to just let everybody know. You're going to say something to me? Well, guess what? I know about your family past. I know about this. I know about those corners you cut. So don't try and tell me, because I'm going to tell everybody else all the wrong things you've done. I'm going to throw you back under the bus too. But we don't read Jesus doing that. Or another thing, Jesus could have said this, that he had been like, oh, so y'all don't think I'm the Messiah though? Psh, Peter, they don't think I'm the Messiah. That's crazy. Peter, what do you think? Should I throw down the fire on them, let them know? Or I'll just send the angels in. I'll let them deal with it for me. But Jesus doesn't do that. Jesus tells them what he thinks is wrong, but let me say something crazy. I think when Jesus died on that cross, I think the Pharisees received the same open invitation that we did. I think he still loved. Jesus loved people. And I'll give you this example too from my life, because I'll be honest, I'm not a person who has a lot of beef. I don't start a lot of confrontations with people. But I think what makes my biggest struggle with love is I think sometimes it's hard for me to love people who I think are just dumb. Can I just say that? If you've ever worked a job in retail, or you're dealing with customers, you're doing checkout, or you work at Planet Fitness or something, right? Sometimes some people are just dumb. And so I'll tell you this story. One day I'm at the job that I was working last year. I'm on the other side of the bar. I'm working with a guy named Isaiah and a girl named Aubrey. And Aubrey's really cool. She's in the back. She's doing something. But Isaiah's a little bit newer. But he's killing it. He's a grown man. He knows what to do. I'm on the other side of the bar, and I'm not going to lie. I'm playing games on my phone or something. But I promise you I worked really hard all day. I earned it. But I'm on the other side of the bar. I'm playing on my phone. This woman comes in. It's just one customer. She orders one drink. And I'm like, Isaiah's grown. He's got it. There's no reason for me to get up. I'm in the middle of something on my phone. I'm gaming. I'm winning. And so I let Isaiah make this drink. But the thing she orders is something that hardly anybody ever orders. Nobody ever orders this thing. And so Isaiah, again, is new. He goes to start making it, and he double checks with her, and he says, hey, you said you wanted this, right? And she says, yeah, that's what I wanted. And he goes, okay. And I can see he's starting to struggle, so I'm thinking, dang, do I got to get up? But luckily, Aubrey comes in from the back, and I'm like, sweet. And so Aubrey comes in to handle it. Aubrey says, hey, what are you doing? And he says, oh, I'm making this. But he says, I've never really made it before, so how do I do it? And so he goes to start making it. And Aubrey, being responsible, she just came up, she just came up, and so she doesn't know the situation. Isaiah's a little bit newer. Aubrey looks at the customer as she goes to start making this, and she says, just to double check, ma'am, did you say you wanted this? And she says, yeah, I said that. Maybe if you all listened a little better, you'd understand. I tell y'all, I dropped my phone. I was like, Everything cuts to slow motion. There's like the little devil and the little angel. And the little devil's like, this is it. You could say everything you've ever wanted to say to dumb customers right now. She opened the floodgate. She started it. She said it first. You know what? Kick her out. Tell her to never come back. Some people might say, like, spit in her drink. But I was like, I thought about it. And the little angel said, well, got to be nice to people. And then I'll tell you what it really said was, man, I'm the oldest person in this room. I've already graduated. These people are in college. I was like, I probably got to be a good example. Drop my phone. All those thoughts go through my mind in like 2 seconds. I stood up and said, well, ma'am, you wouldn't understand how a lot of times we get things a little bit like misheard. We have a lot of items on our menus that sound very similar. Like you wouldn't imagine how many times we make chocolate peanut butter banana for somebody, but in reality they actually ordered peanut butter banana. So you can see how we get that mixed up sometimes. And she said, I guess that does make sense. I'm so sorry. And I was like, oh, you're good. It wasn't good. But in that moment, church, hear me when I say this, in that moment, I wasn't just representing my job right there in that moment. In that moment, and at any given moment, I'm also representing Christ. There are people there who know I'm a Christian. There are people here there who know what I do. What would it have looked like? What would it have looked like if I had responded differently? And so I think about, again, just making sure that I show people love. And if you know anything about me and in my life, in my story, I'm only here today because when I was 16, I didn't feel like I was anybody special, but somebody in my life, I saw them, and I saw that they had been transformed in some way, and they showed me love for the first time from Christ, the love of Christ in my life. And because of their love and because of the way they were transformed, I'm here today, and I feel like I was transformed as well. And so, sometimes you hear the phrase, like, you could be the only Bible somebody reads. Now, that girl, when I was 16, she was the first Bible I ever read. And I think a part of love, and one part that I kind of struggle with too, because again, this sermon this week has been just as much for me as anybody else. One part of love, and one thing that affects how we love, or something that's affected by how we love, is forgiveness. Forgiving people can be hard. And I'll say that from my own experience. I want to read from Luke 6:37. He says, do not judge, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. The words of Jesus. And I think one reason it can be hard to forgive, and again, for me too, one reason it can be hard for us to forgive is because sometimes it's hard to love and it's hard to forgive if we're wanting the wrong things. It's hard for Jesus to transform the way we love if we haven't first let Jesus transform the way we desire. And so I'll put it a little bit simpler like this. It's kind of hard to do the right thing when you really, really want to do the wrong thing, right? And so what are we desiring? How does Jesus transform our desires? And so in thinking about this, I think about, church, like, let's be honest with ourselves. What are you wanting? What do you want? And I don't mean this in a, what's your 5-year life plan? Like, what do you hope to get out of life in 5 years? It can be that. But more so, I think you can be honest with yourself about what you want, about what you spend the most of your time thinking about. What are we thinking about? Are you thinking about, revenge? Or are you thinking about that person who still made you mad? I'm going to read from Philippians chapter 4, verse 8. And here's Paul's thoughts on what we should be thinking about. He says, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. So again, reasons it can be hard to love or reasons it can be hard to forgive. If you spend all your time thinking about, let's say you're an athlete, and you spend all your time thinking about, man, I'm going to go to the game later and I'm going to get so many points. I'm the best player on the field. I'm going to make sure everybody knows it. I can't wait to just do so good. Man, people are going to just put my name up in lights. I'm going to get a trophy. Everybody's going to be thinking about me because I'm just so good. I got to make sure everybody knows. If that's the things you're thinking about, you can see how it would be hard to love the person on your team who drops the ball, or love the person on your team who starts over you, even though you know you're better. How could coach start them over you? And then I'm gonna be real with y'all today. Might want to put your big boy britches on for this one. If y'all are really supporting the team, or if you're on the field and you really want to win, and that's all you're thinking about is just how much you want to win, how good your team is, how good you are, it's probably going to be pretty hard to love the referee when he makes that wrong call. I'm going to say it. How are you reacting in the stands, or how are you reacting in front of your TV when that referee makes that wrong call? If you're thinking about the wrong things, you see how it's hard to do the right thing, right? We've all been there. And so in thinking about, what should we think about? I think about this too. I'll give you a few more examples. I think about if you're always thinking about that boy or that girl, and you're really thinking about how you want them to text you back, and that's all you're thinking about, or that group that you really want to fit in with, or those people at work that you're just always thinking about that stuff, man, it's probably pretty hard to love yourself if you're thinking about these other people so much and how you want them to accept you and things like that. So what are you thinking about? Because I think what you think about affects what you're wanting. And so what should we want? Well, when I was 16, again, going back, when I was 16, I had a lot of different things that I wanted. But if you know me and know my story, I started reading the Bible. That girl started taking me to church. And I had a lot of different worldly things that I wanted. But I started reading the Bible. I read Matthew 1, read Matthew 2, Matthew 3, Matthew 4. I get to Matthew 5. And all the things that I thought the world was telling me that I should want, in one chapter, Jesus kind of flipped them all upside down. I've been watching The Chosen recently, this TV show about, the life of Jesus. Awesome. Highly recommend it. If you haven't started watching The Chosen, you should. Start watching this TV show, and Jesus talks about the Beatitudes at one moment. They do this cool moment in the show where it's specifically about Jesus kind of talking about the Beatitudes. And he tells Matthew that the Beatitudes are kind of a roadmap. And he says that whoever wants to find me, they should look for these groups of people. And so when I read this scripture in a moment, be thinking about, what would Jesus want me to want? And so in Matthew 5, starting in verse 3, he says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." He says, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted." He says, "Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth." He says, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled." He says, "Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy." He says, "Blessed are the pure of heart, for they will see God." He says, "Blessed are the peacekeepers, for they will be called children of God." And finally, he says, "Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." And so I read these verses at 16, and what I would have expected Jesus to have said was something along the lines of, all right, so blessed are those who fit in. You need to be desiring to fit in. That's what you should want. You need to be like everybody else. Jesus didn't say, blessed are the people who have a lot more money. That's what you need to be wanting. Why don't you have a good financial plan? Have you not paid your bills off yet? That's what you need to be desiring. That's what should be on your mind. He doesn't say, blessed are the people who have a nice car. Blessed are the people who have a good boyfriend or girlfriend. Blessed are the people who have a nice house. Blessed are the people who already have their whole life figured out. They know what school they're going to. They know what job they're going to. They know where they're going to work. They know where they're going to die. That's what you need to want. Figure your whole life out. Jesus doesn't say any of those things. Instead, he says, you should desire to be meek. You should desire to keep the peace. You should desire to be pure of heart. And I think the things that we desire affects the way we're able to love people. And I also think that there's more transformation. You can have your desires transformed the more pieces of your life you're willing to surrender. This will be my final point for the evening. I practice all this at night. Every night this week I've been practicing, so I say this evening. This morning, this will be my final point, surrendering. And I think the more pieces of your life you're able to surrender, the more of your life gets transformed. I've been working backwards today. Let me get you in my brain for a second. I've been working backwards. Like I said, I think it's easier to serve people once you figure out how to love people. I think it's easier to love people once you start desiring the right things. And I think the more of your life you're willing to give to God, the less you have your worldly wants, the easier it is to desire the right things. And so I worked backwards. I want to read from 1 Peter 2:16, and talking about this idea of surrendering your life to God and what it means. Because in 1 Peter 2:16, he used some pretty strong language here. He says, live as free people, but do not use your freedom as a cover-up for evil. Live as God's slaves. Live as God's slaves. That's a strong way to say it. But I think what Peter's just genuinely saying is, who does God want you to love? That's who you should love. What is God telling you to do? How is he telling you to serve? Because that's what you should be doing. What does God want you to want? You should want what God wants. What does God want you to give him? You should give God what he's asking you to give him. Whatever God says should go. Less of me, more of God. And so Peter, I think here is just talking about that idea of surrendering. And I think it's easy to surrender some parts of our life. Like, all right, God, here's my Sunday morning. Or like, all right, God, you know what? Here's my tithes. and here's a little extra, you can keep the change. But I think some parts of our life are pretty difficult to give up sometimes, depending on who you are and depending on what your life's like. Man, it can be hard to say, all right, God, well, here's my job situation, because we think, all right, but God, I really want this specific job. I got this degree, I'm going to this school, I'm going to go do this, and this is how I want it to be. So if I give this to you, what if you mess it up? In the same way, if I give God my relationships, all right, God, here's my relationships, but I really want to date a cute boy like this, and he needs to look like this, and so I'm going to keep this one for me, or I really want a girl like this guy, and so I'm just going to keep this one to myself. God, what if I give you this and you mess it up? Because I know how I want it. And I get it, because it's kind of like taking something that you love, and it's like letting somebody borrow something you really care about. Like, you ever have to give something to somebody, and you're like, okay, like, be careful with it. Like, I think about when I had to leave my Bible at Matt's house because Jordan repaired it. He glued it back together and was like, all right, so you can just leave it like this for maybe a day. And I was like, you want me to leave it here? I was like, I can't take it home? He's like, no. And I was like, okay. I was like, Pastor, I'll be here in the morning, like 7 a.m. in the morning. I'm like, Pastor, can I come by your house? I want my Bible back. Like, I know how I like my Bible. My Bible is special to me. I think about, if I had to give my Bible to a stranger, it would have been a lot harder. But if Carson wanted to borrow my Bible for a second, I know Carson well enough, it'd be a little bit easier. Like, Carson and I, I'll tell you this. Carson and I, whenever we take these online quizzes I talked about earlier, like, what fruit are you? Or what Disney character are you? What TV show character are you, right? Whenever Carson and I take these quizzes, I don't know what it says about us, but we always get two characters on the show who are dating. And I'll also tell you, though, Carson and I today, with no prior communication, decided to both wear our pair of the platypus socks. And so I don't know what that says about us, but I will say that I've learned to trust and have this relationship with Carson enough that it's easier for me to surrender things I care about because I know this guy. I know him. I've come to know this guy, and so I think about, in talking about surrendering things we care about, and talking about this idea of surrender again, you can just put surrender on the screen for a while if you want. I think about, parents. At some point when you had your first kid, and let me tell you, I don't have no experience with this, but I'm assuming from what I've heard, that you have your first kid, and it's probably pretty difficult, that first time where you got to go back to work, or y'all are going to go have a mommy-daddy date night, and you leave your kid for the first time. They're no longer within arm's reach for the first time. And maybe you leave them at a babysitter, or maybe you have like a family member or something that you're leaving them with. Maybe it's a daycare, whatever. But probably the first time you leave, and you're thinking, okay, like, did I tell them everything? Did I give them the right pacifier? Did I make sure to give them the right stuff? Did I tell them what time they need to be fed? Maybe I should just call them just to be safe. Maybe I should call, is everything okay? Is everything going all right? Because it's hard. It's difficult to give up something that you care about and that you've put so much effort into, and like that's your baby. You love them. But at a certain point, parents, I feel like it gets here. Maybe if not on the first kid, the second one, the third one. At some point, you go to drop them off at daycare, the babysitter, and you're like, all right, take care. You can keep them all day if you want. I don't care. Don't call me. Don't call me, right? There's this transition period of, you still love them, but it gets a lot easier to surrender your children to these people or surrender them to daycare because you learn to trust and you learn to give. And as much as we love them, as much as we love these parts of our lives, we surrender them to God, and it gets easier and easier. And so I'll give you one more reference. My voice is almost gone. I'll give you one more reference, and worship team, you can come on up and start getting your stuff settled. I just realized that I still have your podium, so I don't know how that's going to work, but we'll figure it out. Worship team, you can come on up. I have one more example for you. Recently, I went to the dentist. I go to my 6-month checkup. And I'll tell you, I like my dentist. My dentist is chill. I don't mind going to the dentist at all. Me and her were talking about this book that I recommended to her. She read it. I let her borrow it. She's like, when do you want it back? And I was like, I know where you work. I'll get it when I can. So I get there. She gives me the book back. She tells me all about it. She's telling me about this book I should read. She goes through the final part of my checkup. I've got my teeth all cleaned. She looks through my teeth, and she says, well, Jonathan, it looks like you've got a cavity. And I said, oh, no. She's like, yeah, you got a cavity. And I was like, how could this be? She's like, you got a cavity in the back of your teeth right there. And she sticks her whole finger in my mouth, and she's looking back there. She's like, yep, you can probably feel it back here like this. I know that's your cavity. She takes her finger in my mouth. She's like, why don't you put your finger in your mouth and you go feel it for yourself? So I put my finger in my mouth, and I'm just feeling around back there. And she said, do you feel your cavity? And I was like, no. I was like, I don't know what I'm feeling for. I'm not a dentist. Like, I'm just in there feeling around. She says, well, there's a cavity back there. And I was like, well, if you say there's a cavity, cool, there's a cavity. I'll get it filled whenever you need me to do. And in my mind, I'm just thinking, like, who would I be to just be like, my voice is gone. Who would I be if I looked at the dentist and was like, you know what? I don't think I have a cavity. I think you're wrong. I didn't feel anything. It's like, why would I do that? Why would I say to this person who's got her degree on the wall and she's been studying dentistry her whole life and she's like dedicated her life to teeth, she knows way more about it than I do. Why would I look at this person and be like, I'm going to keep these for myself. I think I know better. I don't know better. I surrender my teeth to my dentist because I'm like, hey, this is all you. I know you know better than I do on this. And so in our lives, I think about God and how powerful God is and how weird it is sometimes that we can say, okay, God, but I think I know better on this one. It's like, how do we say that? Like, that's me too. That's me. I say that all the time. But how can I not give something to God when he knows more about it than me? I think about like our job situation. You know, God, I want this job. God says, but I've got a better job out there for you. We see a lost job, and God says, man, that job I got lined up for him. Or man, if they only know the financial plans I had for him. We see like a breakup, or that girl that doesn't text us back, and we're all sad, and we're thinking, God, I wanted it this way. God, I feel like I knew she was the one. And God says, man, I see that person that I do have planned for him, and it's so much better. You know, we see these things, and we tend to have these thoughts, but, you know, God always sees the better idea, the better plan. Why not just give it to him? I love the phrase, when we saw a cross, God saw an empty tomb. God can always see ahead. God knows better. And so I think about this on this Palm Sunday. I think about how Jesus, you know, rode into town. We think about the donkey and people threw the palm branches. I got to reading something recently just about how a lot of people at that time probably would have thought the Messiah would have rode into town on some big war horse. He'd have been this macho dude in all kinds of armor, and he'd have rode in and just started cutting down Romans. But that's not what he did. I think God was being kind of funny when he said, you know, I'm going to send my son down. He's going to be some country bum from Nazareth. He's going to have this long beard and these long hair, and he's going to ride into town on a donkey. I think that's God from the jump saying, hey, I know y'all think y'all have it all figured out, but I promise my way's better, and it's going to look a little different. I'm changing things. Jesus showed up and changed things. I think that he was like, yeah, I know y'all are really worried about the Romans, but on this cross, I'm saving y'all from a much greater war. There's a much bigger war. There's a much stronger enemy, and that's who I need to really save you from. And so I think about, again, this idea of surrender, where I'm ending on today. I don't know where you're at. I don't know what part of your life God is calling you to be more transformed this morning, whether it's you need to be serving, you've got some kind of gift, or you're thinking, God, what are my gifts? I don't know who I am. What should I be doing? Or maybe you're being called to love. Maybe there's somebody you got to forgive. Maybe you need to be thinking about, God, what have I been spending so much of my time wanting? Why do I want these things? God, would you transform my desires? Or maybe God's calling you to give him a piece of your life that you just haven't given up yet, and you're holding on to it because, God, you want it a certain way. And so what part of our life can God transform this morning? But the beauty is, the hard part, and we'll celebrate this so much more next Sunday, the hard part's already been done. I look at that cross all the time when I'm up here preaching to the empty pews, but the hard part's already done. Jesus already died for our sins, and he had you in mind. And with his final breath on that cross, he said, it is finished. It is done. Like, there is no more to be done here. The battle is already won. And so in thinking about surrendering or whatever it is God needs to transform in your life, the hard work's already been done. You just got to ask, God, will you transform my life? Jesus just says, would you believe? The hard work's already been done. And so they'll start playing here in a minute. Emily will take my podium back and get it all figured out. The altars are already all open. They'll still be open. But I just pray that during this next time, whether you're standing or sitting, whatever you feel like doing, whether you're at an altar or at your seat, you just be thinking, God, how can you change my life? Has my life truly been changed? Is the old really gone? Has the new creation really come? Or am I clinging on to a lot of those old things, a lot of those old ways? Have I really made a change? God, have you really changed my life? And so I'm going to step down.